Welcome to the deep dive. We are really thrilled to have you joining us today.
Absolutely.
You are here because, well, you possess a relentless curiosity. You are that specific kind of listener who craves a thorough, comprehensive understanding of a world, but you don't want to drown in an endless, uncurated flood of raw information.
Right, you want the substance.
Exactly. You want the multiple perspectives and those profound moments of realization that fundamentally change how you view a story. We completely respect the time you invest with us. And the mission for our time together today is to completely unpack a narrative that begins in the gutter of a frozen industrial wasteland and escalates into a literal, world-shattering event.
It really is quite the escalation.
It's massive. We're stepping into a shattered post-apocalyptic landscape that has been painstakingly rebuilt on a really volatile cocktail of magic, brutal industrialism, and the raw, terrifying power of human belief.
And to map out this trajectory, we have a very specific stack of sources on the table today.
Let's hear what we're working with.
We are drawing from the detailed historical and narrative records of the Apocalyptica Arcanum Genesis campaign, but we are specifically focusing on the events comprising the first 10 chronological sessions.
Only the first 10.
Only the first 10. Alongside these narrative logs, we are pulling from the comprehensive character dossiers of the individuals involved, the established historical records detailing the era known as the Age of Nations, and finally, some rather dense theological texts.
Really dense.
Yes, texts that document the emergence of the divine and demonic forces in this world specifically, the pantheons known as the Choir and the Legion.
And we need to draw a very hard boundary for you right at the start. We are strictly cutting off the narrative at the exact moment the dust settles on Session 10.
No exceptions.
None. For the purposes of this deep dive, whatever unfolds in Session 11 and beyond simply has not happened yet. We are examining the genesis of the theological revolution. Session 10 is the crucible where that revolution begins, and to understand the explosion, we have to study the fuse.
It is a meticulously constructed fuse. But before we begin tracing that line, it is crucial to understand the environment these characters are operating within.
Set the stage for us.
We are looking at the world of Anno Meteorum. The current year is 21 AM. To grasp what that means, you have to look back over 2,000 years to January 18th, 1886.
That's the turning point.
Precisely. On that day, a catastrophic unearthly meteor struck the Earth. It vaporized land masses, knocked the planet completely off its axis, and utterly destroyed the Victorian world order.
Just wiped it out.
Yes. However, the most significant consequence was not the physical devastation. It was the introduction of a substance called Shardisite.
This is the core engine of the entire setting. Shardisite is this pale green, highly volatile crystal. On a surface level, it amplifies magical resonance to terrifying degrees.
Highly radioactive in a magical sense.
Right. And if you are exposed to it for prolonged periods, it mutates flesh and bone into grotesque new forms. But the true horror, and I guess the true miracle of Shardisite, is metaphysical.
The psychological impact.
Exactly. It destabilizes the boundary between thought and matter. When you have high enough concentrations of this crystal, human belief, fear, and desperation stop being abstract concepts and begin to take physical form.
Which means we're dealing with a society where nightmares can literally walk down the street if enough people are terrified of the dark.
It's wild, and I need to establish my perspective before we get into the grim reality of this corporate dystopia. Because when you are navigating a world where a bad thought can mutate a city block, I value pragmatism.
You certainly have a favorite approach.
I do. I value someone who looks at a magical reality-warping crystal and decides the best course of action is to hit it with a heavy piece of steel. That is why I am unabashedly championing the dwarven fighter, Thorin Darkstone, throughout this narrative.
Thorin is, well, he's certainly direct.
What stands out to me about Thorin is the stark contrast he provides. While others are debating the arcane implications of their environment, Thorin relies on leverage, gravity, and a heavy hammer. He serves as the mechanical and moral anchor this group desperately needs to survive.
Thorin provides a blunt instrument when one is required, I'll grant you that. My focus, however, lies with a profoundly different approach to survival.
Here we go.
I'm looking at Dr. Minerva Sedgwick, the Regent of Arcane Affairs for Viroc Industries.
The ultimate corporate shark.
I prefer the term architect. Thorin might know how to break a physical lock, but Dr. Sedgwick understands how to dismantle an entire corporate hierarchy from the inside without ever leaving her desk.
She's definitely ruthless.
She treats the sprawling bureaucracy of this post-apocalyptic world not as an obstacle, but as a weapon. She orchestrates movements on a board the rest of the group doesn't even realize they are standing on until she allows them to see it.
Well, we will see whose methods prove more effective when the walls start coming down. Let us ground you in the beginning of this nightmare. Welcome to Murmansk and the absolute grime of the corporate machine.
The visual of this place is just bleak.
So bleak. We open on a brutal, freezing frontier town built on the edge of the Sea of Ghosts. Murmansk exists for one singular purpose, extracting Shardisite from the permafrost to feed the massive monopoly known as Viroc Industries.
Calling it a town almost gives it too much credit.
Yeah, it's more of a camp.
It is an industrial meat grinder. The architecture is purely utilitarian. The air is thick with pulverized rock and the acrid tang of shard dust, and the populace is entirely subservient to the company's extraction quotas.
Just imagine being in the shoes of the group. You've got Bogdan, Karl, Lusat, and Victor. They are hired as expendable, undocumented extra security for Viroc at a quarry ominously named the First Cut.
A terrible name for a workplace.
Right. They were standing watch in the freezing dark. The sea spray is coating the scaffolding in black ice. And then at midnight, a massive concussive blast rips through the pit.
Total chaos.
Scaffolding collapses into the abyss, tunnels cave in, and crawling out of the freezing smoke and the glowing green dust come these twisted, grotesque mutants.
And these aren't just random monsters.
No, they aren't monsters from the wilderness. They are the miners. The Shardisite has warped their anatomy into something horrific. Leading this charge is their own foreman, Clem Torsen.
Corquem.
His body has been violently reconfigured into a massive, aggressive monstrosity.
The sheer violence of this initial encounter sets a critical tone for everything that follows. After the group manages to cut down these mutated workers, they perform a makeshift autopsy on the bodies.
Very clinical.
It was necessary. And they discover that every single mutated miner has identical puncture wounds. Furthermore, near the epicenter of the blast, they uncover a shattered mechanical injector that is still radiating the sickly green light of highly refined, concentrated liquid Shardisite.
That right there completely shifts the paradigm of the gig. This wasn't a tragic mining accident caused by natural Shardisite exposure in the bedrock.
Not at all.
Someone deliberately injected these desperate, freezing men with concentrated liquid magic to force a mutation, and then blew the mine shaft to either cover up the evidence or test the combat efficacy of the mutated workers.
And we must look at the broader theological implications of this very moment, even this early in the narrative.
Let's get into it.
We know Shardisite crystallizes human emotion into reality. Consider the psychological state of those miners before the injection. They are overworked, freezing, starving, and trapped in a lightless pit.
Just pure misery.
The despair and the suffering in that quarry are absolute. If belief shapes reality, then the agony of the First Cut mine isn't just a tragic byproduct of capitalism. It is actively gestating something deeply malevolent.
You're talking about the Legion.
Yes. The demonic entities of this world, the pantheon known as the Legion entities of rage and suffering, are likely being birthed from the concentrated misery of places exactly like Murmansk. The miner's physical mutation is just the surface level of a much deeper metaphysical corruption occurring in that ice.
That concept makes the environment feel incredibly claustrophobic. You aren't just fighting monsters, you're breathing in the psychic exhaust of a broken society.
Exactly.
And right out of that exact same collapsed shaft, we get the introduction of Thor and Darkstone. Ah, your favorite.
Out of the choking smoke and the falling rock, this dwarven engineer and mercenary blacksmith staggers up to the surface. He is wounded, he's coated in volatile dust, and he has just survived a lethal encounter with a mutant entirely on his own down in the pitch black.
His survival instincts are undeniably sharp.
Okay, let's unpack this. He assesses the shattered injector, he recognizes the hallmarks of deliberate sabotage, and he calculates that his best chance of making it out of Murmansk alive is to align himself with the heavily armed group standing over the bodies.
It is pure, calculated pragmatism. But while Tharon is cementing his place as the group's vanguard, the actual scope of the corporate conspiracy begins to unravel through a heartbreakingly mundane figure. Jonas Lasker. Yes, we meet Jonas Lasker. Jonas is the head of the company cleanup crew dispatched to the quarry. He is a tired, beaten-down middle management company man who has spent his entire life keeping his head down and ignoring the corruption of Viroc Industries.
Just trying to get to retirement.
Jonas represents the complicit middle layer of the corporate structure. He knows the system is rotten, but the system provides his rations. However, the deliberate, weaponized mutation of his own crew pushes him past his breaking point.
He finally snaps.
He privately dismisses the group from their official security duties, effectively taking them off the corporate grid, and implores them to investigate further. He hints at sealed operational directives signed by the Drekanov family, the elite, untouchable dynasty that owns Viroc, and speaks of heavily guarded night shipments moving through the docks.
And Jonas pays the absolute highest price for that fleeting moment of moral courage.
He really does.
Later that evening, the group is escorting him near the freezing, fog-choked docks. The shadows literally detach themselves from the alleyway, and a massive reptilian monstrosity ambushes them.
The PO3.
Right. This isn't a mutated miner like they saw at the quarry. This is a designated prototype. It bears the classification PO3. This is a bespoke biological weapon unleashed into the streets with the specific, targeted objective of silencing Jonas before he can expose the Drekanov family's internal logistics.
The efficiency of the corporate machine is terrifying. The group manages to physically destroy the PO3 creature through a grueling battle, but they cannot save Jonas.
It was a brutal fight.
He suffers catastrophic arterial damage. As he bleeds out on the freezing wooden planks of the pier, his final desperate act is pressing his gathered scraps of evidence, shipping manifests, and encrypted ledger pages into the group's hands.
A heavy burden.
This is the definitive point of no return. They transition from being expendable corporate mercenaries to active, targeted investigators holding lethal company secrets.
They are holding the metaphorical bag, standing over a dead whistleblower and a slaughtered biological weapon. So they retreat to an opulent, unsettlingly empty restaurant called the Gilded Gull to attempt to process the situation. And this is where your favored corporate architect makes her entrance.
Dr. Minerva Sedgwick does not merely make an entrance. She seizes total control of the narrative.
She definitely takes over the room.
She is the regent of arcane affairs, a position of immense bureaucratic and magical authority. She intercepts them at their lowest, most vulnerable point. She sits at their table, orchestrates the pouring of tea with chilling calm, and systematically deconstructs their entire predicament.
She lays it all out.
She reveals that their initial hiring was completely off the books. The man who brought them to Murmansk, a field officer named Anton Eriksson, is profoundly corrupt. He operates under the direct protection of Lucian Drekanov, the executive regent of operations, and has been actively siphoning company resources to fund these horrific biological experiments.
I have to question her methodology here, though. She doesn't provide this intelligence out of the goodness of her heart.
Of course not.
She recognizes that this group is desperate, highly capable of violence, and entirely untraceable. She needs assets that don't exist on any official Viroc ledger.
What's fascinating here is her methodology is the logical endpoint of a broken capitalist system running on magic. She directs them to an illicit warehouse in the dock district that Anton is using as a staging ground.
Right into the fire.
And she provides them with identifying badges from the Department of Arcane Affairs, which will allow them to bypass the perimeter security wards. But the brilliance of her manipulation lies in the caveat.
The catch.
She explicitly informs them that these badges are decommissioned antiques. They will open the outer doors, but if the group is captured and subjected to a deep arcane scan, the badges will register as fraudulent.
That isn't just a loophole, it is an incredible liability. If Lucian captures and tortures this group, her plausible deniability evaporates instantly. She is sending them into a heavily fortified location with zero extraction plan and zero protection.
She is playing the odds. In a world where overt action against an executive like Lucian Drekanov would result in her immediate execution, leveraging desperate mercenaries with faulty badges is the only viable maneuver. She provides them with the illusion of authority, knowing full well that their survival depends entirely on their own lethality.
They certainly have to lean into that lethality pretty quickly. They approach the warehouse district, which is just this labyrinth of rusted corrugated steel and freezing fog.
Extremely atmospheric.
They utilize an arcane construct shaped like a hawk to perform aerial reconnaissance, mapping out the guard patrols and shift changes. They locate a heavily reinforced side entrance. Lucette, the tall, blue-skinned, analytically minded arcanist of the group, utilizes a specialized arcane resonance to shatter the physical locking mechanisms holding the door shut.
The knock spell.
Right, the knock spell. Once inside, the atmosphere is incredibly tense. They bypass the initial security layer and infiltrate the administrative office. There, they uncover the paper trail Minerva promised.
The smoking gun. They find comprehensive ledgers detailing cargo movements that abruptly ceased 6 months prior. This timeline perfectly aligns with Anton Erickson going rogue and funneling massive quantities of raw materials to Lucian Drekanov's undocumented projects.
The paperwork is damning, but what they find in the sub-basement is just catastrophic.
The real prize.
Thorin breaches a sealed containment unit and discovers a massive, unrefined geode of Shardisite. It is radiating a sickly, pulsating green light that physically nauseates the group.
Just being near it is dangerous.
And when Thorin reaches out and touches the raw stone, the sheer density of the magical radiation causes a localized temporal distortion. Thorin experiences the flow of time dilating, grinding to a near halt, while he watches the rest of his companions moving in frantic, hyper-accelerated motion around him.
The psychological toll of that kind of temporal dissonance cannot be overstated. It disorients Thorin at the exact moment absolute clarity is required.
Yeah.
Because their infiltration has not gone unnoticed.
The ambush is brutal. While the group is grappling with the metaphysical weight of the Shardisite, the perimeter alarms are silently tripped. 8 figures emerge from the dense fog outside the warehouse.
A heavy response team.
4 of them are entirely mechanized, heavy brass automatons moving in perfect, terrifying synchronization. The remaining 4 are heavily augmented corporate enforcers. And directing this assault is a shadowy, unidentified woman weaving complex, arcane energy from the rear. What follows is a desperate, chaotic fight for survival inside an architecturally unstable building.
The combat is a study in structural degradation.
It really is. Lucette hurls fuels of condensed, explosive fire that melt the brass plating of the automatons, but the concussive force shatters the load-bearing pillars of the warehouse. The ceiling begins to give way.
Everything is coming down.
A massive steel girder plummets from the rafters and physically pins Lucette to the floor, trapping him amidst the wreckage. Silas, relying on stealth and precision, is systematically hunted by a magically enhanced sniper firing through the decaying walls.
They are fighting the environment as much as the enforcers.
Exactly. They are fighting not just the enforcers, but the collapsing environment itself. By the slimmest of margins, they manage to dismantle the automatons and eliminate the enforcers, though the shadowy spellcaster vanishes into the fog. They escape the collapsing structure, dragging the ledgers and the massive chunk of raw Shardisite into the freezing night.
This violent extraction sets the stage for a massive escalation. We move into the next phase, escalating the corporate war. The group is now in possession of highly volatile, raw Shardisite.
Which is a huge problem.
They recognize that their conventional weaponry is insufficient against mechanized automatons and biological weapons. They make the terrifying decision to weaponize the raw crystal.
Let me contextualize how dangerous this is for you. Handling raw, unrefined Shardisite in the world of Anna Meteorum is akin to attempting to dismantle a live, deteriorating nuclear core with hand tools.
That's an apt comparison.
It is pure, reality-warping energy that desperately wants to rewrite the molecular structure of anything it touches. The group needs to fracture the crystal to imbue their weapons, but doing so could vaporize the entire city block. Thorin steps forward.
Of course he does.
He takes his heavy rock hammer, calculates the fault lines within the glowing geode, and strikes it with a single, precise blow.
The tension must have been suffocating. A millimeter of miscalculation would result in total atomic disassembly.
The impact triggers a blinding, concussive wave of white light. Arcane energy floods the room, fundamentally altering the fabric of reality for a brief moment. Silas is hit with a profound, unbidden psychic vision detailing his past connections to Thorin, the Shardisite forcefully bringing his suppressed memories to the surface.
It forces truth out.
Bogdan, who draws his power from a mysterious, sentient tome, manages to channel a terrifying amount of this raw energy directly into the pages of his book, permanently altering its resonance. Thorin successfully binds a fragment of the crystal to his heavy glaive. But the most fascinating consequence falls upon Lucette.
The Arcanist.
Yes, the Arcanist attempts to weave the Shardisite energy into the fabric of his heavy cloak to grant it protective properties. However, in the exact millisecond the energy binds to the fabric, Lucette experiences a fleeting, human moment of profound doubt regarding his own magical competency.
And because Shardisite takes human emotion and forces it to become physical reality.
His doubt manifests literally. The magic recoils. The cloak doesn't become protective, it becomes permanently, irrevocably invisible. Not Lucette himself. The fabric of the cloak simply ceases to interact with the visual spectrum.
So he's wearing an invisible piece of clothing.
He is forced to walk around wearing a heavy garment that no one, not even himself, can see. It is a brilliant mechanical demonstration of how deeply dangerous this world is. Your own fleeting insecurities can permanently alter your physical reality.
Now, heavily armed and pulsating with arcane energy, they are summoned by the very system they're trying to dismantle. The Department of Operations sends an official mandate requiring their presence in the administration tower, specifically directing them to Suite 4C.
Walking right into the lion's den.
They are walking directly into the fortified executive office of Anton Eriksson. The corrupt officer Minerva instructed them to investigate.
It is a phenomenal collision of corporate protocol and raw violence. They enter this lavish subterranean luxury office. Anton is not alone. He is accompanied by his associate Galina.
The pleasantries don't last long.
Anton immediately drops the bureaucratic pleasantries. He accuses the group of the warehouse raid. When they refuse to capitulate, he bypasses negotiation entirely and attempts to forcibly rewrite their neural pathways, casting a high-level compulsion to enslave their minds.
The group violently rejects the mental intrusion, and the office devolves into a confined, lethal, arcane firefight.
We are talking about devastating magical artillery being deployed in a room filled with mahogany desks and leather chairs. The group pushes their bodies to the absolute limit, moving with hyper-accelerated speed. They manifest a pillar of searing, concentrated lunar light that tears through the ceiling and incinerates the expensive rugs.
A total mess.
They coordinate their strikes, systematically dismantling Anton's magical barriers until they overwhelm and execute him. Galina attempts to conceal herself using complex illusion work, but the group tracks her arcane signature and finishes her off with a lethal psychic spear to the mind.
When Galina's life force expires, the illusion she was maintaining to preserve her pristine corporate appearance collapses.
It's a grim reveal.
Her true physical form is revealed to be horrifically scarred and mutated, a glaring physical testament to the shard-like corruption that comes from prolonged exposure to Lucian Drekanov's unauthorized biological catalysts.
The adrenaline fades, and the stark reality of their situation sets in. They are standing in the executive wing of a monolithic corporation, surrounded by the shattered remnants of an office, with the corpses of two high-ranking company officials bleeding out onto the floor.
They have to act fast.
They transition immediately from combatants to forensic cleaners. They systematically drag the bodies to the massive, ornate fireplace dominating the suite and incinerate them to ash, destroying the primary evidence of the altercation. Before leaving, they scour the room and secure Anton's personal arcane focus, a device specifically engineered to nullify hostile magic, which becomes a critical asset later on.
They gathered the physical evidence they extracted from the warehouse and the office, a biological specimen they cannot identify, glass containers filled with highly reactive glowing powder, and the shipping manifests bearing Anton's signature. And they bypass the corporate hierarchy entirely, delivering this cash directly to Dr. Minerva Cedric.
She must be ecstatic. They just handed her the sword to decapitate her rival.
She's entirely validated. The evidence provides undeniable proof that the Drekanov family, with Lucian at the helm, has completely circumvented the board of directors. He is systematically hijacking Viroc's proprietary supply chains and utilizing highly unstable mutagenic catalysts to construct an army that answers only to him.
So she has what she needs.
Minerva now possesses the geopolitical ammunition required to initiate a full-scale corporate purge.
But the group cannot afford to wait for the bureaucracy to turn its wheels. The atmosphere in Murmansk fundamentally changes. They are now officially classified as hostile anomalies by Viroc security. They cannot return to their lodgings. They are forced into the freezing streets, hunted.
The tension is at its peak here.
While maintaining a desperate watch from a frozen rooftop, they witness a massive winged silhouette pass silently across the face of the moon, immediately followed by a concussive pulse of green Shardisite energy originating from the edge of the city. Lucien's project is no longer contained.
It's out in the open.
The group realizes that if they do not sever the head of the snake tonight, there won't be a city left to save. They decide to assault Drekanov Manor directly.
This transition is masterfully executed. The narrative shifts from a gritty industrial espionage thriller into something resembling high arcana gothic horror. Drekanov Manor is a sprawling, heavily fortified estate isolated from the squalor of the town.
It's a fortress.
The group utilizes their avian construct to perform high-altitude reconnaissance, identifying a vulnerability in the lower foundational levels.
The infiltration of the sublevels introduces a deeply unsettling psychological horror. They bypass the exterior patrols and breach the lower living quarters. The very first thing they discover is the desiccated, mummified corpse of Harold Drekanov, the regent of financial affairs.
The brother.
One of the ruling brothers of the monopoly is simply sitting dead in an armchair in his own home, drained of life. They push deeper into the subterranean levels, utilizing an arcane resonance to shatter the seals on a massive steel vault door. They step into a sprawling subterranean laboratory. It is a slaughterhouse.
The sheer scale of the atrocity is staggering.
The room is filled with enormous glass suspension tanks containing the rotting, failed remains of reptilian mutants. But the detail that truly solidifies the horror is that many of these twisted, half-formed biological weapons are still wearing the shredded, blood-stained remains of standard-issue Viroc security uniforms.
Lucien Drekanov is not merely splicing monster DNA. He is actively abducting his own corporate security forces, the very people sworn to protect his infrastructure, and subjecting them to horrific arcane vivisection.
It's pure evil.
The level of sociopathic hubris required to orchestrate this industrial-scale mutilation directly beneath the floorboards of his ancestral home is profound.
And that hubris is physicalized as we move into the siege of the manor. The group leaves the horrors of the basement and ascends into the family chapel. They walk into this massive, vaulted sanctuary. Dominating the entire space, looming over the altar, is a 60-foot-tall statue of Serafin Drekanov, the ancient patriarch of the family.
It's not a monument to a god.
No, it is a monument to the family's own perceived divinity.
The architectural arrogance is astounding.
And of course, the group immediately focuses on the most dangerous element in the room. The statue's eyes are constructed from two massive, immaculately refined Shardisite gemstones. These stones are practically radiating power. The group decides, despite the obvious architectural peril, to extract them.
A very risky move.
They begin a precarious 60-foot climb up the sheer face of the statue. Bogdan reaches the apex, wedges a tool behind one of the gems, pries it loose, and manages to safely catch it. Victor, a warrior bound by an oath of radiant conviction, attempts the same maneuver on the second eye. He pries the massive gemstone loose. Well, wait, he doesn't just pry it loose, his grip slips.
He drops it.
The stone plummets 60 feet and impacts the solid stone floor of the chapel.
It is a catastrophic failure of physical coordination.
The resulting Shardisite detonation is a concussive wave of sheer kinetic and arcane force that shatters the silence of the entire estate. The alarm is instantly raised. The group scrambles from the chapel and bursts into the adjacent arcane study, directly confronting the architect of this nightmare, Lucien Drekanov.
Lucy is not an opponent they can intimidate or outmaneuver with corporate rhetoric. He gazes at them with absolute contempt. He does not engage in a physical skirmish. He simply weaves a devastating, wide-scale, arcane subjugation matrix.
It's an overwhelming spell.
A wave of oppressive magical force washes over the room, instantly overriding the nervous systems of almost the entire group. They collapse, unconscious and paralyzed. They are systematically stripped of their weapons, their artifacts, and their armor, and are dragged deep into the manor's dungeon blocks.
Almost the entire group, because when Lucien begins weaving that subjugation matrix, Thorin Darkstone, our remarkably pragmatic dwarf, assesses the expanding wave of magical force.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
He looks at the incoming magic, he looks at the edge of the second-story balcony they were standing on, and he simply throws himself backward over the railing into the night air.
Incredible.
The rest of his companions wake up in cold iron cells. But Thorin survives the fall and is now completely loose, entirely alone, in a heavily fortified estate swarming with elite guards on high alert. What follows is a masterclass in guerrilla infiltration.
It is a sequence of events that highlights the absolute necessity of non-magical proficiency in a world overly reliant on arcane infrastructure.
Thorin begins by scaling the sheer, freezing exterior stonework of the manor to locate a viable re-entry point. He hauls himself over a parapet and drops into an arcane-charged courtyard. He is immediately intercepted by two heavily augmented elite guards.
His cornered?
He cannot talk his way out of this, and he has no magical backup. He engages them in brutal, close-quarters combat. During the struggle, the ambient arcane energy pulsing through the courtyard grounds itself through his equipment, violently short-circuiting and permanently destroying his magical stabilizing bracers.
A heavy loss of gear.
Despite the loss of his gear, he systematically breaks both guards and conceals their bodies in the shadows. He then presses himself against the cold stone and eavesdrops on a passing patrol, successfully intercepting the updated security cipher, Amberfall.
Acquiring that cipher is a massive tactical advantage. It allows him to bypass the internal auditory wards.
He utilizes the cipher to infiltrate the manor's grand library. Standing guard amidst the ancient texts is a lethal, multi-limbed brass automaton. Thorin doesn't attempt to fight it conventionally.
Pragmatism again.
He utilizes the surrounding architecture to launch himself onto machine's back, grapples its primary sensory array, and physically jams a heavy steel override pin directly into its central processing chassis, seizing the gears and disabling the construct in complete silence.
Very efficient.
He then slips through a concealed door into a master bedroom and discovers the living patriarch, Seraphim Drekanov. The man the 60-foot statue was modeled after is incredibly ancient, entirely bedridden, and physically wired into a massive network of scrying crystals, monitoring every hallway of the estate.
The patriarch is the central nervous system of the manor's security. Thorin, analyzing the situation, attempts a misguided act of battlefield triage.
He finds an unidentified vial of liquid on a nearby table, assumes it is a restorative tonic, and attempts to force-feed it to the ancient man to stabilize his erratic breathing. The sudden shock of the unknown alchemical compound instantly stops Seraphim Drekanov's heart.
Oops.
Thorin accidentally assassinates the apex of the corporate monopoly while attempting to administer first aid. It is a moment of profound, dark absurdity. He quickly gathers whatever valuables he can carry, sneaks out of the executive wing, and descends into the massive industrial kitchens.
Or things get even stranger.
The staff is in a state of absolute panic due to the alarms. Thorin steps into the center of the kitchen, grabs a live goose from a preparation counter, and violently beheads it with a heavy meat cleaver. The sheer shock and aggressive confidence of the act somehow convince the terrified cooking staff that he is a brutally efficient culinary enforcer, allowing him to pass through the service corridors unchallenged.
It is a profound demonstration of how chaos can be weaponized. While Thorin is dismantling the manor's hierarchy through brute force and culinary intimidation, the rest of the group is fighting a psychological battle in the dungeons.
Down in the dark.
They awaken stripped of their agency. They must rely entirely on their innate abilities. They utilize spatial folding techniques to bypass the iron bars, physically overpower their interrogators, and begin a methodical ascent from the dark. Eventually, the two narratives converge. The group regroups with Thorin, who is likely coated in a mixture of freezing rain, goose blood, and stolen aristocratic wealth.
The reunion is electric. They coordinate a rapid assault on the manor's secure armory. They not only recover their confiscated equipment, but also secure several highly dangerous experimental assets.
They get some serious upgrades here.
They acquire a voltaic discharge rod, capable of emitting lethal electrical arcs, several glass ampoules filled with highly unstable explosive shard dust, and crucially, an ancient artifact known as the Verdant Nexus Prism. This crystal allows the user to temporarily sever themselves from the immediate flow of reality, creating an isolated pocket dimension. Fully armed, radiating adrenaline, and entirely focused on ending the Drekanov lineage, they march toward the climax of the narrative.
We have arrived at the climax of the birth of myth. The group approaches the massive reinforced oak doors of the Great Hall. They do not attempt stealth. They breach the doors with overwhelming kinetic force and step into a slaughterhouse.
The vast vaulted hall is heavily garrisoned. Elite corporate security forces are intermingled with the fanatic, robed members of the Cult of the Verdant Light, the secretive religious sect Lucien has cultivated to worship his biological atrocities.
A deadly mix of enemies.
The group does not hesitate. They unleash an absolute torrent of destruction. They hurl volatile arcana that incinerates the tapestries, discharge their firearms into the ranks of the cultists, and utilize their heavy weaponry to break the mechanized armor of the guards. It is a grueling, systematic extermination of every hostile entity in the room.
But the atmosphere in the hall fundamentally changes as the final guard collapses. The immense volume of magical energy expended during the massacre does not dissipate into the ether. It begins to visibly coalesce, drawn like a localized gravity well toward the shattered entrance of the adjacent chapel.
Building up to something massive.
And then, the silence is broken by the chilling, disembodied voice of Lucien Drekanov echoing from the vaulted ceiling. He does not sound angry. He sounds entirely vindicated. He delivers a terrifying monologue, outlining his vision of a world stripped of chaos and ruled through calculus and power.
Pure megalomania.
He then materializes high above them, suspended in the air by complex levitation currents, and begins systematically raining down devastating, concentrated blasts of destructive arcana.
The group is entirely outmatched by this aerial bombardment. Lucien is operating from an untouchable vantage point, and his strikes are surgical. Members of the group are thrown across the room, their ribs cracking under the concussive force. They are desperately channeling whatever restorative magic they have left just to keep each other breathing.
They are on the brink of a total party wipe.
Recognizing that they are seconds away from total systemic failure, they execute a desperate tactical maneuver. They activate the verdant nexus prism. Reality bends, folds inward, and the entire group vanishes from the Great Hall, pulling themselves into a stagnant pocket of isolated time directly in the middle of a lethal firefight.
It is a remarkable manipulation of spatial physics. They retreat into a void of nothingness to let their shattered bodies knit back together. But this void is not entirely empty.
Something speaks to them.
While suspended in this temporal isolation, Bogdan experiences a profound metaphysical communion. The sentient entity bound within his warlock tome, a presence that has only ever offered cryptic whispers, speaks to him with absolute, resonant clarity. It commands him to endure the coming horror, offering a prophetic promise that a light would rise to counter the consuming darkness waiting for them outside the prism.
They bind their wounds, steady their breathing, and prepare to re-enter reality. The artifact exacts a heavy physiological toll as the pocket dimension collapses and they drop back into the Great Hall. They are struck by a sudden, ravenous starvation. But the physical pain is irrelevant compared to their tactical positioning.
They have the drop on him.
The prism deposits them in the exact spatial coordinates they occupied before vanishing. Lucien, assuming he had vaporized them, is hovering with his back exposed. Thoron, reacting with pure instinctual predatory speed, steps out of the collapsing portal. He hefts his heavy glaive, the weapon carrying the massive fragment of raw Shardisite, and launches himself upward. He executes a flawless, devastating strike that cleanly severs Lucien Drekanov's head from his shoulders in midair.
By all conventional narrative logic, this should be the moment of triumph. The tyrant has been executed, the corporate monopoly has been crippled, the architect of the biological horrors is dead.
It seems like a clean win.
But I must emphasize the gravity of what occurs next. The execution of Lucien Drekanov does not terminate his experiment. The massive concentration of arcane energy coalescing in the chapel reaches an absolute critical mass.
The silence following Lucien's death lasts for a fraction of a second. Then, the massive, ornate stained glass windows of the Great Hall violently implode. A hurricane of razor-sharp emerald shards rains down upon the marble floor.
The structure itself is failing.
The entire foundation of the manor begins to fracture and heave, and dragging itself out of the ruined chapel, crushing the masonry beneath immense scaled claws, is a creature that defies the natural order of the world. It is a creature of absolute mythological terror. It is the very first dragon.
We must look at the mechanics of this manifestation. Lucien utilized thousands of pounds of raw Shardisite, the mutated biomats of his own workers, and the absolute fanatical devotion of the cult of the verdant light to force a myth to become physical. He engineered an apex predator of pure magic.
The group is paralyzed by the sheer existential weight of the creature's presence. They open fire, hurling everything they have left at the beast, but their attacks barely scratch the hyperdense scales. The dragon inhales and unleashes a concussive, deafening roar.
The physical force of the sound alone is devastating.
The sheer sonic and magical force of the sound causes the creature's shadow to fracture. Portions of the dragon's essence split off, forming these semi-corporeal, shard-born echoes, shadow dragons that immediately dive toward the group.
Total annihilation seems inevitable, but we must recall the metaphysical promise delivered to Bogdan within the prism. A light would rise.
As the shadow dragons descend, Bogdan Moravec becomes the focal point of an entirely different kind of manifestation. The air around him ignites. He is engulfed in a blinding, searing column of radiant golden energy.
The contrast is beautiful.
He is lifted off the marble floor, suspended in the air by the sheer force of the light. His physical form begins to shift and elevate. Right before the eyes of his terrified companions, Bogdan transcends his mortality and transforms into the first avatar of radiance.
The visual dichotomy is staggering. The crystallization of Lucien's horrific ambition clashing against the crystallization of desperate divine hope.
Bogdan, radiating holy light, raises a hand toward one of the descending shadow dragons. He channels a surge of pure, retributive solar fire and completely obliterates the echo, erasing it from existence. We have the first true angel and the first true dragon locked in a cosmic standoff amidst the crumbling ruins of a corrupt corporate estate in the freezing wastes of Murmansk.
And that is the exact precarious moment where our narrative analysis concludes.
We're pausing it right there.
The manor is actively collapsing around them in a maelstrom of green shard dust and falling stone. The true dragon is entirely uninjured, roaring its dominance into the freezing night sky. Bogdan is suspended in radiant ascension. The world has been fundamentally, irreversibly fractured. As we established, the group's desperate bid for survival in Session 11 and beyond remains a story for another time. Our focus now must shift entirely to the aftermath. We must analyze what this singular moment means for the future of the planet.
We are moving into theorizing the fallout. We need to elevate our perspective from the immediate survival of the group to the massive geopolitical and theological implications of what just occurred in that ruined courtyard.
Precisely the right approach. If we connect this to the bigger picture, when we cross-reference the events of Session 10 with the established historical texts of the Age of Nations, a profound and startling correlation emerges.
Let's hear the historical record.
The historical records document that in the year 941 AM, a fanatical organization identified as the Cult of the Verdant Light successfully manifested the first dragon. The texts also note that the sheer metaphysical trauma of this event unintentionally triggered the birth of the first angelic entity.
Are you suggesting that the religious bedrock of this entire world is Bogdan?
I am stating that the historical timelines align flawlessly. The listener must grasp the magnitude of this connection. The origin point of the entire angelic host, the divine entities that entire nations will eventually worship and build cathedrals to revere, begins at the exact moment Bogdan is engulfed in light. He is patient zero for divinity.
That completely recontextualizes the entire setting. Let us analyze the physics of this miracle, because the mechanics of belief in Anno Meteorum are crucial here.
How does it actually work?
Shardisite acts as a solvent that dissolves the barrier between human thought and physical reality. When you introduce a creature of absolute apocalyptic destruction, the dragon, into the world, you generate an unprecedented wave of global terror. When you combine that terror with the desperate, concentrated, burning hope for salvation from mortals like Bogdan and his companions, the omnipresent Shardisite in the atmosphere is forced to take that hope and weave it into physical matter. Bogdan's ascension was the universe frantically building an antibody to fight the infection of the dragon.
This raises an important question. How does a singular localized event, one warlock transcending in a ruined courtyard, evolve over centuries into a highly structured global religious institution? How does Bogdan's moment of radiance systematize into the formalized dogma of the choir?
Because the choir isn't just an abstract concept of light, it is a specific pantheon. They worship Amandine, the archangel of love. They venerate Desta, the archangel of joy, and Jasiri, the archangel of courage.
My analysis suggests that these specific archangels were not created by a distant, omnipotent creator sitting above the clouds. They were forged in the crucible of human trauma. The existence of the dragon, this apex predator of magic, inflicted such severe psychological damage upon the surviving population that humanity was forced to pray for universal grounding virtues simply to maintain their sanity.
They needed something to hold on to.
They desperately needed love, joy, and courage to combat the terror. The sheer volume of that collective human desperation filtered through the Shardisite-rich atmosphere of the planet crystallized those specific virtues into sentient divine beings. Bogdan provided the initial spark, proving that belief could manifest salvation. Humanity took that spark, fanned it into a roaring fire of collective faith, and quite literally willed their own gods into existence to protect them.
That is a beautiful, if terrifying, concept of faith. But we cannot discuss the light without acknowledging the shadow. If collective hope and the desperate need for emotional survival birthed the angelic pantheon of the choir, we must look back to the beginning. We must look at the horrific, grinding, miserable reality of the Viroc Industries mining operations. What did the absolute despair of the first cut quarry create?
We are returning to the genesis of the Legion, the demonic host.
I firmly theorize that the demons of rage, such as the entity known as Sarabi, and the demons of suffering, like Nakoda, were not born in some subterranean hellscape. They were born in Murmansk. They were gestating in the freezing mud and the shard dust of the quarries long before the dragon ever shattered the manor roof.
The conditions were perfect for it.
Every lash of the foreman's whip, every desperate, freezing night spent in the barracks, every mutated lung coughing up blood in the dark, that immense volume of human suffering acted as the metaphysical amniotic fluid for the demonic host. The agony of the workers was absorbed by the Shardisite and slowly coalesced into entities of pure malevolence.
It is a profoundly sobering realization. The divine and the demonic forces in Anno Meteorum are not external judges imposing their will upon humanity. They are the physical breathing symptoms of humanity's absolute best and absolute worst impulses, magnified to apocalyptic scales by the radioactive crystals beneath their feet.
And this brings us to why this narrative is so incredibly vital for you, the listener, to understand. Look at the trajectory we just mapped out. A seemingly standard, gritty, entirely mundane corporate sabotage mission. A group of mercenaries stealing ledgers, fighting corrupt middle managers in an office, and attempting to cover their tracks by burning bodies in a fireplace.
It started so small.
Those small, desperate acts of violence served as the spark that ignited a global theological revolution. It is a powerful, terrifying reminder of how tiny actions within a highly volatile, interconnected system can completely rewrite the fundamental laws of reality. You never truly know which stone you overturn is going to release a monster that reshapes the world.
I want to leave you with one final, deeply unsettling thought to consider as we conclude our analysis. We have definitively established that in this universe, collective belief, when subjected to the pressure of Shardisite, shapes physical reality. The group at Drekanov Manor just witnessed Ground Zero. They saw the dragon tear its way into the world. But consider the immediate future. What happens tomorrow morning?
The fallout.
What happens when the surviving, terrified citizens of Murmansk wake up, see the smoking crater where the manor used to be, find the massive emerald scales embedded in the snow, and begin to talk?
The rumors begin to spread.
Exactly the point. If belief makes a concept real and widespread, collective belief makes that concept permanent and powerful. Does the spreading rumor of the dragon actively increase the dragon's strength?
That's a chilling thought.
Every terrified whisper shared in a dark tavern, every exaggerated account told by a fleeing corporate guard, are they inadvertently feeding the beast? Did the group, by failing to contain the creature and allowing it to escape into the public consciousness, accidentally write the script for their own impending apocalypse? The more the world fears the dragon, the more invincible the dragon becomes.
That is a truly horrifying paradox that will keep me up tonight. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this exploration has given you a profound new perspective on how stories, belief, and survival intersect. Keep questioning the reality of the narrative you consume, look closely at the systems you operate within, and remember, in a world where thoughts have weight, be very careful what you choose to believe in. We'll see you next time.